Good morning and welcome to a Versent webinar where we're presenting and happy to be celebrating the launch of PingCloud in the Australian region. I'm Eddie Smith and I'm one of the co-founders and CISO at Versent, and I'm going to be your guide through this morning's session where I'll be using some of my battle scars and experience from identity projects over the last 20 years or so to illustrate why Versent are so excited by the launch of PingCloud. This morning we're going to be walking through a number of areas. Initially we'll go through a bit of background and current state on how our identity technology journey has led us to needing a platform as a service delivery model, how the evolution of software delivery methods such as CI/CD, DevOps have created this drive towards simplicity, which is leading to a desire to simplify the way we manage, deploy and operate solutions. This will then lead us into a bit of analysis on the common deployment options for solutions, and we're going to take a look at the relative strengths and trade-offs between those deployment approaches at a high level. And with that context, we're then going to dive a little bit deeper into the PingCloud platform specifically, and we're going to look at its capabilities and its unique differentiators above and beyond those current SaaS and PaaS offerings as they stand. I will then overlay the PaaS deployment model with our deployment approach. We'll talk through how this combination helps Versent's approach to access management and supports and enables our standards-based and pattern-led ethos. And also will then lead into the ways Versent can leverage our experience and our deployment patterns in access management and the PingCloud platform to assist you on your identity journey. So how have we got here, and how have we come to a place where we find SaaS and PaaS solutions so much more attractive as a deployment form factor to traditional on-premise or software-based deployments? We've had similar paradigm shifts in the past. We've had hardware appliances, we've had the push and adoption of virtual machines, and more recently we've had the uplift or the drive towards containerization. And many organizations now have followed this and now have a cloud-first style of requirement for when they deploy or pick a solution. There are a number of different reasons. Firstly, and most obviously at the start of any traditional deployment, we always have an upfront design and request process, followed by the cost of actually building that base capability. And that includes new infrastructure, VMs or operating system deployments, changes to the network, firewall burns, DNS records that need to be created. And then we get to deploy and perform the base configuration of the software, which we're going to then leverage for our solution. And all these tasks have an upfront effort and upfront cost, and they just take time to get them built and deployed and pushed through an organization's process. And it also creates external dependencies and external team engagement and management, which in turn adds to the complexity of delivering the solution. And that's before we even start on solving the actual problem that we're trying to solve. The other area that's been a challenge is finding good identity SMEs and talent in the industry. Identity engineers and consultants have traditionally been fairly scarce in the market, and they're difficult to pick up and even more difficult to hold once we move out of the more interesting deployment and development cycles and into the less interesting run is not fun style ongoing platform management and operations. That, when you combine it with the way solutions are being deployed and requiring multidisciplinary skills in terms of DevOps and AWS or cloud technologies, as well as having those people need to know identity as well, makes it even more difficult to find and build a team. And then we've had to build, companies have had to build and maintain multidisciplinary teams, which adds a different challenge. And once again, that's all before we do a base deployment of the platform, or all to do a base deployment of the platform before we even get to starting to solve that problem. Also, a lot of identity solutions don't leverage a great deal of automation. We have different teams doing the management of production environments, different teams doing development. Combine those sort of separations, a lack of automation with some bad human practices, and what ends up happening is that we make changes into test that we don't make into production to fix specific issues, or we make a change in production to fix a specific emergency fix. And we can't deploy applications config to an environment if there isn't a non-prod instance of that application. And so what we have is we have changes being made to environments without going through a consistent and enforceable release process or a release pipeline. Which invariably leads us to environment drift, which is one of the banes of the existing on-prem solutions. In that it works in environment A, but it doesn't work in environment B in terms of replicating bugs or replicating features. The classic, it works fine on my laptop style issue that you sort of hit in your production environments. And that's really because of the way we patch manually, we deploy config manually in those older sort of legacy approaches. And it just gradually over time, those environments drift in terms of their similarity to each other, which just makes updates management and a nightmare going forward. And what that means is that it costs more and more to maintain, to update, to patch the environments, and releasing an application isn't short and quick. It takes weeks and months as you work through those considerations and try and bring those environments into a common state. The other thing that's sort of driven us more towards those on-prem and sort of slowed the migration away is sort of the visibility on the security that you have over those non-on-prem environments. So it's security through obscurity or that lack of visibility into the environments really has made customers nervous about moving into the cloud, into SaaS or PaaS style solutions, just because their risk appetite isn't there, and identity is essentially a keys to the kingdom tier 1 style application that makes it a high risk to be moving in. But that's also coupled against people are really starting to work that sort of Apple or Android experience in everything they do. And the way we're able to provide that uplift in user experience and in capability through SaaS and PaaS with the flexibility of releases, the rapid deployment, the more modern technology and technology approaches and integrations with mobiles is removing a lot of those more legacy and not so nice user experiences. Right, so as I said, we've been living in the software world where we've got all the dev and all of the ops. It's often been a place where the large banks have deployed their solutions due to regulatory requirements and risk requirements. The advantages we have with the software is there's no limitations, which is also a curse to some degrees in that there's no guardrails or guides on how we can leverage the software. So we tend to do whatever we think is necessary, even if it may not be best practice or an appropriate solution from a maintainability or an operations perspective. And this is where a lot of companies are, and it is that sort of ongoing cost and the environment drift and all those issues that I just talked about that has made people sort of look towards alternate solutions to the point where we're seeing the form factor, as I call it, so SaaS, PaaS, etc., of the software drive how you consume the software. So a little bit similar to the appliance days or the ISO appliance days of the early 2000s, where that form factor, because of the simpler maintenance that you get out of those styles of solutions, have driven the consumption, and there's been a willingness as you move to the SaaS world to live with limitations in the solution. So SaaSes, just by their nature being multi-tenant, being a single code base, etc., do have a glass ceiling, as I call it, or limitations in their ability to solve for complex use cases. So you get some of the dev, but you get none of the ops is the advantage. They're maintained, they're updated, and they're significantly simpler to use for the organization, and come with a lower TCO as you transfer the maintenance of underlying components like networking, infrastructure, operating systems into that SaaS, and those problems disappear. But as I said, it does have that glass ceiling, and when you're rushing forward on a digital project and you hit your head against the glass ceiling, it's not a pleasant feeling. And typically we haven't had something in the middle that can solve those issues. But this is where platform as a service traditionally has been things like RDS in Amazon's database, and it doesn't really solve all of our problems. But what it does do is it gives us, all of the devs with none of the ops. It gives us a much lower on-prem footprint compared to the software naturally, and ironically compared to the SaaS worlds. And it also removes that glass ceiling, but keeps that low SME requirement. So the need to run the infrastructure is significantly lower because you can focus on capabilities rather than those underlying components. We're all familiar with how this is sort of, I hope, with how this was coined by IBM as pizza as a service. And it looked and it sort of gave us that when you have the software world, you're really responsible for a huge number of different moving components, and you have a large number of different teams with different SLAs, from DNS to firewall burn requests, to infrastructure, to operating build, to SOEs, to agents on SOEs, etc., that we're all maintaining and managing in that on-prem world. And then we move to software as a service, where that all went away and we get a base version. And that's great. It solves a large number of the problems, but over time we're seeing those SaaSes are starting to suffer from that environment drift issue, where the config is subtly those different environments. So we're starting to see issues creeping in that SaaS world, purely because it doesn't go up into that release and those integration layers, specifically the release layer, which is, well, sorry, wrong button. Why we're excited about PingCloud, because it does push beyond a traditional PaaS and really does roll up into that application, that base config, and that release capability that traditional PaaS platforms as a service like RDS haven't evolved to, just because they haven't had a need, because they're a single component. Whereas this is very much a multi-component platform as a service, a single tenant that sort of gives us a lot of excitement. So, sort of putting that in a prettier fashion, it really does give you that cake and eat it, in that it's got that full capability that you get with the on-prem software. It's extremely fast to deploy. Comes with a low SME requirement, but you get a lot more flexibility, portability, auditability, as well as your confidentiality, availability, and integrity in that sort of security world. And doesn't slow you down in any way, but it does give you that ability to pivot and do more advanced requirements, such as consumer data rights for those in banking or in utilities, with that coming down the road, without the need to run on-prem software. As I said, part of the ironic part with the platform as a service we're finding is, with the SaaSes, there is always an on-prem component to bridge you into your on-prem or your legacy world. And with the PingCloud platform as a service, it's proving that we just don't need those on-prem components, because we can run them within that infrastructure. So it kind of leads us into what is it? And essentially, it is Ping software being run for you by Ping. Versent is excited because we've worked with Ping as part of our Stacks capability and our Stacks offering, which manages that underlying AWS capability and gives you those security guardrails and those control guardrails and release guardrails for an Amazon environment. And then on top of that, Ping have brought their DevOps and their software capabilities and orchestrating their release processes to build a real best of breed, have your cake and eat it style environment that gives you the fast deployment yet bespoke capabilities of an on-prem solution, without any of the operational overhead that you normally get with that environment. We're excited today, as I said, because it's now available in Australia. So it's been launched in the US with a number of customers consuming it, and we're now rolling it into the Australian environment. And it really, which is going to make it more an exciting proposition for us as we're able to deploy into the local market without data going offshore. Some of the features that are sort of differentiated from other solutions in this sort of space is that the ability to be multi-region. So when we look at the software as a service, they're often run in cells or multi-tenant pods. And what that means is they're typically tied to a region with a DR region potentially, but they're typically tied to a single region, and they're not active from that capability. With PingCloud, we are able to deploy across multiple AWS regions, sync the data, run in a multi-clustered environment. And that is your environment, which is another differentiator. There is no multi-tenant or other people consuming those compute resources, as you would get with a Salesforce instance, for example, excuse me, where they can consume and at peak times impact your ability to consume and use that platform. It's a dedicated solution, so it is single tenant. And it does have multiple environments within there that you migrate your code and your configuration between, but it's fully featured as well. So it's that single tenant, fully featured environment that enables you to do everything you need to do, and without having to share the cake that you get to eat all of. Some of the other things that are really sort of beneficial, as I said, it's this hub account concept that's been introduced by PingCloud. Which gives us very, very flexible networking capabilities back into your on-prem requirement. And that's got an AWS Transit Gateway that enables a lot of that connectivity, but that means we can bridge into your environment natively. We can run some additional components in that hub account to synchronize data and do other functions. But it then lets us also publish Kerberos or integrate with your Kerberos servers for AD single sign-on for workforce style environments. We can leverage your internal DNS so that we can connect to those old legacy systems. And it also lets us publish other things like Radius for VPN consumption and things like that, which gives you just that extra degree of flexibility, but without the on-prem components that you're going to get from a software as a service solution when you try and solve those problems. Because naturally, the more you deploy on-prem, the more you start to move back towards some of those issues we have around software concurrency, upgrades, infrastructure. Even though there's a lighter weight footprint and lighter weight configuration, it still has issues and introduces complexities and operational overhead. And then it's the other things that you would expect out of a solution like this. So the software currency is always up to date. You get your upgrades included as part of the platform as a service with zero outage. And it's 100% cloud native, as I said, with no on-prem infrastructure, but sort of native born in the cloud style solution. The other thing I mentioned, or that it is fully featured, so it is all the Ping software products on a roadmap basis. And I'll talk to that in a moment. Matter of fact, here it is. So what do we get with PingCloud in terms of capabilities? So it's the full Ping product stack, with the last two at the bottom there being the Ping Intelligence and Data Governance coming in a future release in 2021. But it's Ping Federate with its single sign-on, it's Ping ID with multi-factor authentication, Ping Access, and Ping Directory, which really provide the nucleus of any identity and a solution or access solution. And that can be used in either a cloud, a customer sort of CIAM cases, supporting CDR requirements, for example, or it can be used with an on-prem workforce requirements, doing desktop multi-factor authentication or federating out to multiple different sources. And it's extremely feature rich in each of these capabilities that we can tailor down to your specific requirements. And part of the Ping product stack strength is its ability to support those legacy workloads and those legacy integrations when compared to other solutions and especially SaaS style solutions. But it really does give that ability to use each of those components as you would in your on-prem solution. So if you're an existing Ping customer, the actual migration is extremely quick and easy in terms of the configuration will work. But it also lets you then extend that as you can't do with some other solutions and satisfy some of those legacy interactions. So in terms of that roadmap, the current deployment supports Ping and Ping Fed and Ping Directory, which is the nucleus of any solution. Ping Directory naturally is that advanced next-gen profile store. Ping Federate is your Swiss Army knife of authentication and single sign-on. Coming in a month or three is Ping Central, which is their new self-service portal for onboarding. So it's similar to your application databases in the Ping One world, where you can onboard applications quickly and easily without the need for an administrator, and that'll push its capabilities into the config into the underlying applications. And Ping Access and Ping Data Sync are also coming, which will allow you to synchronize data, and that really sort of gives you that portability with Ping Data Sync, meaning that we can not have to master the data in the SaaS instance, and we can replicate that data down into local on-prem infrastructure, such as a Ping Directory or another LDAP server or a database, to allow you and give that data portability and that data flexibility, which is required by a lot of regulatory organizations. For example, APRA with their materiality clauses do you require to be able to move out of a software as a service provider, especially when it's a tier one solution like an authentication solution. And we can do this. If we look at other approaches to this, where the password stays in the SaaS, you've got to run the SaaS as long as you want to get access to those passwords, or until you can migrate those passwords on a pure authentication basis. So Data Sync really does give us that flexibility to enrich the data we have in the SaaS in real time, or push the data down to on-stream systems, as well as give you that data portability going forward. And Ping Access gives you that API security and that web security, all bundled in with one solution to integrate with those legacy workloads or those, as well as API workloads, based on open standards. And next year, as I said, Ping Intelligence, which is an automatic response star AI ML engine for API security, and Ping Data Gov as a fine-grained authorization and advanced consent model for different expanded use cases. What this then really means from a benefits perspective is that typical, 12 to 20 weeks based on your infrastructure, based on your onboarding requirements, based on those just typical enterprise release gate points and release points, they sort of disappear with PingCloud. We can move straight from design into configuration, straight to onboarding once we're ready to go. And I've sort of mentioned it at least 3 or 4 times, is the flexibility of the solution is we have no glass ceiling. We've now got the speed to deploy rapidly. We've got the portability that I mentioned, where we can keep our data moving in and out of the cloud. And we get that full transparency, the ability to scale, and our costs inherently become lower because the complexity is moving out of our platform. And it is being covered by more modern approaches to operations and release processes. But and in terms of that, this is why it's exciting. It is we're able to pivot the way we deploy our solutions with this PingCloud, which sort of leads me into how we do identity. So Versent's approach to identity is a little bit different to your traditional approaches. The first thing that is really more unusual is that we try and automate everything we do. So it's traditional identity solutions just haven't had that ability. If we look at, for example, the Oracle stack, unless you're an absolute wizard in the WebLogic scripting toolkit, it is extremely difficult to automate just because of the number of components. And we very much focus on automating our solutions go to way. From source code through to infrastructure, through to configuration deployment, everything is modeled as source code. And it's that expertise that we've leveraged over the course of our AWS-based Ping deployments. But just exciting in that we're going to be able to more rapidly encourage that and focus more on the continuous deployment than the continuous integration aspects of the release. The other difference in the way we approach identity is, and we've sort of been doing this for a few years now, is moving away from snowflake integrations. So a lot of applications consider themselves very special in the way they have to be integrated in a certain way, and you end up designing for exceptions, which makes your solutions more complex and just creates problems ongoing when you need to upgrade and maintain, excuse me, or move solutions between versions, etc. And so what we really do have is we have a standards-based pattern-led approach to our integrations. So very much we define a series of patterns in the way the applications integrate and the way the applications access the solution, which then gives you an extremely flexible matrix of options on which to on-deploy applications. And then when we hit an applications that either are snowflakes or have snowflakes, it sort of lessens their requirements or lessens their ability to drive the identity solution, because we have our predefined mechanisms for working with the solution. And what that really means is the actual onboarding of an application can turn into hours or can turn into self-service for an end application by checking the configuration into Git or into any source control, and we push that into the release processes that we have that push down. And with PingCloud, that becomes more possible just by the way that a lot of that automation and those DevOps processes have been taken care of us. And with the introduction of Ping Central in August, it also means that those self-service interfaces can be opened up for those who, for those end applications that can't support checking into Git because that's a little too complex for them. Ping Central can then be used for that self-service onboarding of their applications into the ecosystem. It also means that for those who are extremely technical, we can actually incorporate that into their release processes. So there is no human involvement, even checking a file into a Git from that perspective. The release process can be integrated with PingCloud in that they do a release of their application and it gets the credentials on the fly or generates the credentials on the fly for that application. And that's kind of the core way, the three sort of foundational aspects in the way that we focus on identity in terms of it's cloud-based, it's automation delivered, and it's pattern-led, standards-based, which really simplifies the ongoing maintenance of a platform and speeds the integration and just lowers your total TCO, and then enables you to focus on providing richer features with organizations, as opposed to focusing on the running and the maintaining of the platform. And by working with PingCloud, it really sort of pushes us up that value chain to providing richer functional experiences at that upper level, and sort of moving into that identity experience layer that we've been presenting on over the last few years as well, and making it a differentiator. What we can start to do with these technologies in the creation of that trust fabric for application interoperability now becomes very exciting when we're not focusing on the delivery of the underlying platform and the underlying capabilities. So then, in terms of Versent's professional services, in the interest of a plug, Versent does a number of different things. Security first in everything we do, automate everything we do. We firmly believe robots are coming for our jobs, so we're better off building robots, and cloud first in all our solutions. And on top of those foundational services, we have an identity practice, app dev, API development, data analytics, and a digital experience practice that leverage and build those different capabilities and merges it all together to create an end-to-end solution and digital transformation for customers. With regards to identity specifically and PingCloud, logical professional services or professional services are going to be relevant for in the short term is really building you a blueprint or a roadmap and a strategy as to how you start to adopt and take advantage of new solutions like PingCloud and migrate from that legacy approach or those disjointed, compartmentalized identity pockets that you currently have. And then we've also got the ability to do industry-specific deployments. So I've mentioned CDR once or twice, consumer data right. It's very much a focus area for a lot of organizations, a lot of our customers at the moment. So we've worked with our capabilities in that space to be able to provide industry-specific targeted deployments for CDR to enable more rapid releases to allow organizations to start to integrate as we then work through their enterprise release processes to onboard a solution like that. And then we'll be evolving those industry specific deployments for superannuation, for retail organizations to provide different more rapidly deployable solutions in this space, and enterprise integration. Naturally, it'd be all great if all of our solutions were more modern with SaaS-based services, supported modern standards like OAuth, but invariably there are some special applications that we still rely on that we've had a lot of experience with over 21 years in technology in this space, and there aren't many things that we haven't seen, although I do occasionally get surprised. But it really is how we then work with you to integrate those enterprise applications to provide a more modern approach to authenticating and authorizing your access to those. With regards to then how that works with PingCloud, as I said, that initial platform build process now doesn't exist like it does with traditional software. That initial build out of an AWS ENC or Enterprise Native Cloud platform is sort of done by the PingCloud platform now. So we've squashed that process down in terms of that platform build, and that's now done within 3 hours of deploying the PingCloud instance for yourselves. So it really allows us to focus upfront initially on the planning, on the integrations, on the patterns. We then deploy the account creation with everything checked into Git from that initial phase. The accounts are created, our first few environments are created, and we can then focus on onboarding applications and integrating applications and users into that environment before we push that into operations. So the whole process moves from 16 weeks, and that, let's just say for that initial phase, 12 to 16 weeks, and we're really moving much more quickly, and we're up and running within 1 to 2 sprints to get you going and integrated and starting UAT. Then once it's running, we have our world famous Versent managed services who just provide an outstanding level of service and quality of service to our customers. And they really take it from where the PingCloud hands off up into those topper layers. And they really provide just a more advanced capability, architectural support, SME guidance with discretionary hours at your disposal, and a more proactive monitoring and deep monitoring capability that you get with the general platform monitoring. And I've come to the end of the allotted 30 minutes. I'm happy to hang around and answer any questions or discussions if anybody has anything that they'd like to ask or talk through. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to info@Versent for details on the webinar, or LinkedIn, send me a LinkedIn message, and I'll happily answer any questions that we have. And I'm now just making the questions visible. So without any further ado, then, if we don't have any questions, I will let you get back to your days and back to your isolation and back to a different video conference. But thank you very, very much for taking the time to share my excitement with the launch of PingCloud in Australia. Thank you.